I just really wanted to focus on this one slide and set the stage for discussion.
All right, thank you, David. All right, so Kevin's been working at Genentech, where he heads the Oncology Business Development Group, and is responsible for identifying, evaluating, and establishing strategic partnerships and licenses for access to novel oncology therapeutics. Previously, also at Genentech, Kevin led the Business Development Group in charge for technology licenses and collaborations. And prior to joining Genentech, he was at Wilson Sonsini Goodrich and Rosati, where he specialized in structuring and negotiating life sciences partnering transactions, including research and development collaborations, product and technology licenses, acquisitions, and JVs. And earlier in his career, Kevin worked in the biochemistry department in the biotechnology unit of Bayer Corporation. Kevin holds a BA in molecular cell biology from the University of California, Berkeley, and a JD from the University of San Francisco.
That's the last one. Okay, there we go. So it's a pleasure being here with you tonight. Next slide. Let's just so I think probably everyone in this room has been following the Facebook IPO story, and perhaps maybe even one or two of you, or maybe more, have invested in the IPO.
We won't ask the question.
Well, I was going to ask for a show of hands, but so what does it have to do with oncology? Absolutely nothing. But there were a lot of expectations, hopes, some despair around the valuation, and there's a lot of debate about valuation. And Facebook, social networking, has a different sort of risk profile, unlike our business. So the major risk that a social networking platform, a company like Facebook, really focuses on, the biggest component is commercial risk. Right? The questions around the valuation centered around, given the growing and large user base that Facebook has, do they have the ability to translate that into growth revenues and capture the revenues? So that's the opposite of our business. So our business, drug development, is one of the most expensive and riskiest industries out there. And so the risk driver for us, I would argue, is on the earlier stage. R&D risk is the biggest component that drives value, that actually leads to the valuation for this business. And that is where you have the highest scientific and technical risk. And it's because that risk is so great, we have probably what I would say is the biggest challenge right now, which is the lack of R&D productivity. And so that, I think, is what industries, the pharma industry, the biotech industry is looking at. How can we make a more productive R&D pipeline? Everyone's looking at it. There's discussions about patent cliffs driving this, generics, but I think the real problem is a lot of money's gone in, and not a lot of real medicines have come out of it. And so now you have the regulators and the payers. They're all, this is something that's front and center in every sphere of the world right now, looking at how we can afford all this, all these rising costs. And to me, the real answer is you make better drugs. And so the main lever that we have, in my opinion, for improving that R&D productivity is to reduce your rate of attrition. Or in other words, to improve your probability of technical success. So next slide. So just the next few minutes, I'm just going to talk about why I think probability of technical success is unique for oncology, and then just give Genentech's perspective on how our approach to R&D and partnering is designed to maximize probability of technical success. Next slide. So this slide is a study. It shows the outcome of a study done by Steve Paul. You might have seen this. This is published in Nature. And what it shows is, the title says PTS, the most important industry statistic. That's my opinion. It may not be yours, but from where I sit, that is what we focus on the most. And what this shows is the various stages of R&D, all the way from discovery through launch. The top row is the probability of technical success for each stage. And what I want you to take away from this is that the overall PTS by these numbers is 4% from discovery to launch. And so you've heard these numbers bounce around for years. This is based on aggregate data from a peer group of large pharma companies that was examined by Steve Paul. And so the numbers always bounce around. People argue whether it's higher, I think we have data now to show what the lack of productivity, it really is that risky. And so this panel is focusing on valuation, But for early stage, when you look at a risk of that, you may as well not run your discounted cash flow because it's going to be negative. So next slide. Oncology. So now this is a study that was released by Bio last year, tracking 4,000 compounds through development through various therapeutic areas. And so what you see here is the orange bars represent the phase 2 success rates across each therapeutic area. And you see they're pretty much the same. The green bar is showing the phase 3 success rates. And I want to draw out oncology, and you see that it's got the lowest of these major, these are sort of the major therapeutic areas where you see kind of a significant investment by industry. But oncology has the lowest success rate in phase 3. So that's really late in the game. It's better to fail fast and early because you save a lot of money. And that's not what's happened. We've been failing. I mean, after 4,000 drugs, you look at this, and oncology is highlighted to be pretty dramatically. And so you can talk about the number of reasons why that may be. It could be the heterogeneity of cancer. It could be the lack of predictive models. All these reasons, well, the data's there. Is that so? The market may be increasing, but we're not doing a great job here. So how are we addressing that? Next slide. So Genentech's strategy, the approach to it. So, sometimes we reinvent strategy or kind of develop strategy to kind of change the conditions, and that's strategic agility. And so the world may be different today, but our strategies remain the same. So this company was founded over 35 years ago, and it was based on 3 prongs in its philosophy. So the first was science-driven, always making that the heart of the strategy by hiring the best scientists, and more importantly, focusing on tackling, understanding the underlying disease mechanisms, really knowing what you're doing with the disease, how it works, with the hope that you can pick the right target and the right drug and do the right studies. And you will always not only have a focus on basic science, but keep the patients in mind, the translational aspects, which sometimes get lost. It can be really cool science, but if it has no clinically meaningful benefit, it may not be worthwhile. And then creating just a place that fosters all of this. And so we believe that this is an approach, it's the same approach that we had 35 years ago, it's the same approach we have today, and that sort of science-driven approach led to Herceptin, which was the first oncology product launched with a companion diagnostic. And so you heard some examples earlier today, really good successes in oncology. Last year, 2 products that were launched, both with companion diagnostic, but there wasn't a whole lot in between that time, which is 1998 and last year. And so maybe this was prescient of the trend, but now personalized healthcare has been sort of the front and center, the focus of a lot of oncology companies, mostly to deal with the heterogeneity of cancer, but also to try to improve our chances of success in research and development. So next slide, please. So our strategy today, as I said, is the same. We're still focusing on basic research, and personalized healthcare is a key element of it. So it's articulate every program that we take forward early on at the stage of entering into the development portfolio has a biomarker strategy. And so this is, I think there's a lot of discussion about truly pursuing this path. This is a commitment that we have. We ask our teams to have that, and it has to be presented. And the merits of that project will be judged in part by the strength of the diagnostic hypothesis. And so we've decided as a strategy through these decades to not diversify out. We've tried to stay close to what we were good at. And going back to that 4% probability of technical success, there's a learning paradigm here, right? So if you invest significant amounts in research, the philosophy was really invest significant amounts of research and try to understand the sort of interconnectivities, the fundamental mechanisms, it'll pay off in the long run. You may have failures along the way, but you're going to really understand the disease. And in fact, if you look at the Roche group overall last year spent nearly, I think, $7 billion in research. So it's still one of the largest investors in research that exists in the industry. So this is still true today. And next slide. So how are we doing with this? So if you're looking at us, this is a slide that shows an example of how the strategy's paid off. I think one thing you can talk about diagnostics, we talk about cycle times. I think the belief that diagnostics are an easier pathway is probably, I think you said, well, it's been misunderstood, and it's probably been underestimated. It's pretty challenging. In some ways, it's got its own challenges, very much akin to drug development, but you've got to get that test done early in time for your pivotal study to use it. And there's a lot of science that goes in that, a lot of engineering, and some regulatory risk. But this, I think, shows you how it paid off. So the top 3 is showing our late stage pipeline, all with companion diagnostics being developed in parallel with the drug. So oncology, we've been able to do it, and then the last 2, we've recently been able to do this outside of oncology, in immunology, and in hepatitis C. So I think it took a while to get here, but that showed that the strategy has paid off, and for me, that's it's one reason why I stay at Genentech is I really believe that this is the right thing. I think to manage the complexity that we're in, especially with oncology, we need to have this kind of approach. So next slide. So partnering is an integral part of the R&D strategy, and so this is a relatively basic slide, but it is a real part of Genentech's strategy. And it's funny how often I get that question. It's like, really? You're in the BD group at Genentech, what are you doing there? Because there's this sort of presumption that everything comes from internally. And I think that's a pretty insular perspective because innovation knows no boundaries. And our mission is to find the best science out there. Any science that can lead to a potential new medicine, we're going to try to bring it into a relationship with Genentech. And this is to show you our current pipeline from early development through phase 2. Over half of the molecules have benefited from a partnership in some way. The slide that you showed earlier with the 5 products that you liked, 4 out of those 5 were resulted from partnerships. And so I think that that's something that's very important to Genentech's strategy, but also it allows us to diversify our own biases. Although we've invested in our own scientists, we allow them to pick investments we make. It allows you to look outside the world and not be wedded too much on the not, or not taking too much of a not invented here syndrome. Next slide. And so part of our strategy, I think you saw some statistics earlier show that there's a lot of early stage deal making. I don't know how new of a trend that is, but for Genentech, that's always been true. We don't do a large volume of deals, but we tend to do very early stage deals. And the reason why is because we want to apply what we do best. We feel that we've invested in a lot of research, we've invested in a lot of scientific capabilities. That's where we can make a real difference in the program. If you start early, hopefully by the time you get to phase 3, you figured out a lot of the questions. And especially with companion diagnostics, you want to start the biomarker discovery early. So this is showing you the number of deals that we've done by stage in the last few years. And the majority of them are preclinical, and a heavy load of them are early stage at the discovery stage. Next slide. So, I started off by saying PTS, to me, maximizing PTS is how I think is the best lever we can have for improving R&D productivity in our industry. There's also PTS associated with partnering. And so over half our portfolio, as I mentioned, is contributed by partnering. Doing the right partnership is important, but there's a probability of whether that partnership is successful. And success to someone like me, to a drug developer, is getting a product launched and to patients. Success for biotechs, maybe smaller companies, may look different. It may be liquidity for their investors, it may be growing the business. Those are sometimes at odds, and so our job is to figure out a way that we can align incentives, and that's what we try to do by being creative and flexible in our deal structure. So I just wanted to show 3 recent examples of deals that my team did, all oncology, obviously, that kind of shows this, and I think that this is another trend. I'm not showing any, you can go anywhere and look at this, the trend, look at statistics, aggregate statistics of deals that are done. Each one of these highlights trends in the partnering landscape, which is really just a reflection of the state of the research pipeline, which is your inventory out there, state of the financial situation for small companies not being able to raise or access capital. All these come together and lead to the situations like this. And I would say that last point has resulted in a lot of companies giving up the sort of FIPCO dream, right? The desire to start at the very early stages of discovery company and really getting all the way to launch as a fully integrated, a pharmaceutical company. I think that amount of capital that it takes and the risk is just not enough for early stage investors. And so you see that changing in models. And so the first deal, this Constellation, is a funded collaboration. That had a feature where we had an option to acquire the company. The second deal was with a company called Pharma, which was also in Boston. It had a funded collaboration, but an option to acquire the program that we invested in. So that was an asset purchase. The third deal is with Array, and this is an all-in strategic alliance with milestone royalty payments, which sounds straightforward, but I'll get into these in a little bit more detail. So the next slide. So the strategic focus for Constellation was betting in a new area for us. So epigenetics is an area that has drugs in clinic and approved drugs, but it's really at that stage in what we believe in science, where you're showing genetic, you're showing mutations and a very important role in epigenetic regulators of disease. Very early, but incredibly risky. In fact, if you looked at the area, when we decided, made the strategic decision to go into epigenetics, we thought, well, this is a rich area for targets, right? And people are always asking what areas are interesting, what targets are interesting. We said epigenetics was something we want to get into because we think it's rich for targets, but we didn't know which targets are the best because it's that early. And so to answer that, you have kind of two approaches. Go really narrow, have a test case and establish feasibility, but you're really betting a lot on 1 or 2 or 3 data points, or go broadly. And that's what we chose to do here. We didn't have a lot of in-house capabilities. It's a highly technical area which requires special tools and approaches and expertise. And so we found a company that had top-notch scientists, a very impressive platform that could probe in the area, and some programs that would get us started to work. So we would integrate with them and have a very broad-based discovery collaboration with committed research funding, working alongside with their scientists, learning about the epigenetic space, working with them closely. And meanwhile, they retained the rights to their 2 lead programs. Because if we took those 2 programs, we basically would have had to acquire the company, and the company was really early on. It still had places to go. And so the deal was structured so they have the ability to create independent value for their investors by taking their own programs, taking non-dilutive financing from our deal, and being able to put that back into their own development efforts. However, they're interesting programs, and we feel like the work that we're doing together under the collaboration could benefit those programs from what you understand in the research collaboration. So we pre-negotiated an option to buy out the company later on point. And this is an interesting thing because now you're seeing more of these deals being done where you have a predefined path to liquidity, which investors like, is you kind of have a buyer set up early on. So the next slide is Pharma, which is a cancer metabolism deal. I got 1 minute, so I'm going to go through these quickly. You can ask the questions later. The main thing that was different here is that Pharma has a fantastic chemistry platform and capabilities, and we were really interested in one target in metabolism, but we wanted a program that was advanced, that had enough chemistry to provide good leads and also the ability for backups. And so the strategic drivers there is find the best chemistry, but Pharma is a platform company, and really, you know, this is one of their most advanced programs, so how do you bridge that sort of interest? If you took away their most advanced program, do you take too much value out of the company? And so they were interested in having a shorter time frame to liquidity for the investors. And so we structured the deal so there was an asset acquisition after a defined success point where they would give up downstream payments. Royalties is what we would typically say. We would take over all the going forward risk on the program. But it allows them to monetize one of their assets, provide liquidity to their investors, and at the same time keep the company operating independently with the ability to use their platform in multiple additional programs for the same sort of play. And this is happening at a time where technology investing was not in vogue. So the last deal I'll talk about that was one that we signed, and this one actually just won an award. I guess I don't know if anyone really cares about BD awards, but they won the Breakthrough Alliance of the Year for from Deloitte. And so this was an interesting scenario where our strategy was we had a check-1 inhibitor that just entered the clinic, and it was simply we wanted to be best in class. Array had the closest molecule to us. They were only a few months away from clinic. Different profile, but also with potential of best in class. You just don't know because we were just getting into man for the first time. And so for us to increase our probability of success, we thought that by pooling the programs and giving us flexibility to develop either one, we would pick the winner after you knew something about the molecules in man. And this is a deal where we got the exclusive license, but we had to structure the deal in a way that it was financially incentivize us to make the right decision based on the science. It shouldn't be financially burdened by either program because that would weigh into your decision making and governance. And so that's what we did. And either way, whichever program advances forward, Array gets a share through some milestone payments or royalties. And I think that was a good win for both of us. At the end of the day, we believe in the biology enough. We believe check-1 as a mechanism. The ability to have 2 molecules at that stage at the right time, pick the right profile when we don't know, gives us the best chance of actually making this into a real drug. And so that was my last case study. I'm out of time, but I hope that this gives you some insight into how Genentech approaches research and development and partnering, and hopefully it'll lead to more drugs for patients.
last speaker for the night is Mark Charest, Vice President at Newly Venture Partners. He joined in 2012. Previously, Mark was a Kaufman Fellow at Panorama Capital, where he served on the board of Vitoro Biopharmaceuticals and was a board observer at Presidio Pharmaceuticals and Power Vision. Mark joined Panorama from ZS Associates, where he led the consulting engagements for a variety of global pharmaceutical companies focused on commercial strategies and optimization. Mark gained early healthcare investing experience as an associate at Greatman Partners, where he sourced and managed capital allocation in public and private healthcare companies. And prior to Greatpoint, Mark played a leadership role in several drug discovery programs in the oncology area as a medicinal chemistry lab manager at Novartis Institute for Biomedical Research. Mark received his PhD in chemistry and chemical biology from Harvard University as a National Science Foundation Graduate Research Fellow, and his BA in chemistry with the highest honors from Rutgers University. All right.
Thank you, Benoit, and thanks to the organizers. I was thinking about, getting asked to come speak, and I always like to do it, and the primary reason is I spend so much of my life asking other people questions. I just feel it's fair that I, give others the opportunity. So, go hard on me. And just thinking about valuing oncology assets, the view from Sand Hill Road, and no, if you're wondering, I'm not talking about what happens at Kleiner Perkins after hours. It's really how the VC community thinks about, valuing assets broadly in biopharma and oncology specifically, and I'll try to give you some context for that. So let's go to the next slide. A couple key points I want to make. So let me give you a big picture contextual framework for how we think about biopharma investing. For us, it's an arbitrage business. We're putting risk capital to work for a defined period of time against a development program that we hope and believe when we get to that next point will lead to a value inflection in the company that we can hopefully transact or do some partnership that gives us access to liquidity. It's an arbitrage business, and that's what we're playing for. So how do we think about valuation? What does it mean? Well, it's kind of a circular argument, right? So we have to have a belief around an exit valuation based on a comp universe, and we can do DCF, however you want to get to a value. Comps are really good. We have to work backwards from that and kind of think about, okay, what's probability of success for this? How much money is it going to take us to get there? And we really need to make a return for our investors, right? There's not too many face folks in life sciences. There aren't any, right? You can't make 1,000x. We're in the 2 to 10x business primarily, private market life sciences investing. So we can't have a lot of zeros, and we have to be able to ensure return. So it's kind of a cyclic analysis, and if some of these who have pitched to VCs, when you see us sitting around kind of with a timeline slide, and we're asking all these questions about timelines of capital, we're doing this math in our head, and we're saying to ourselves, is it even possible, right? If you're telling me this trial is going to cost $100 million, and I think I can sell it for 150, that's going to be a quick meeting, right? So this is to put it in context, right? It's and I think for you entrepreneurs out there thinking about this, do this math for yourself and be able to speak a compelling value proposition when you pitch to folks, because I think that really helps. All right, let's go to the next one. So, what's unique about oncology? Well, the good news is that unlike a lot of other therapeutic areas, the cash to reach value inflection is often much less capital, and it's on often a much shorter timeline. And the reason for that is, for some of what was touched on, right? In the cases where, we can get a good diagnostic and we have a well-defined patient population, we don't have to do a diabetes outcome study that's going to take 10 years and cost, $200 million to get an answer. It's pretty binary. We can, select 15 patients with a diagnostic or with some prognostic screening criteria, and we can immediately in a phase 1 or phase 1A or phase 1B, early in clinical development, get a pretty clear signal on what a drug is doing with the potential to build out another indication and create a lot of value that way. So investors really like oncology. The downside to oncology is, all the big players, some of them here, Genentech, Roche, Onyx as well, and all the other big players in oncology, they hired these smart guys at Capgemini and these other groups that said, strategically, where should we be focusing our time? And they came back and said, oncology. And they got some good advice. So oncology is ferociously competitive, right? You go to ASCO. Who goes to ASCO? Just actually next week, right? So, pick any hot known oncology target, and you're going to see 10 posters from all the big boys and some small players, same target, right? You want a MEK inhibitor, you want ERK, you want a TK, you mentioned VEGF kinase. I mean, my God, right? If you're coming to the, the party with one of those now, it's pretty tough, right? So it's ferociously competitive. So I think that, you really have to have a niche to go after, and you can get a niche by either going for a new mechanism. That's hard, a lot of risk there. There's been some success there, but another good way to do it is to have a differentiated product profile that you can prove early, right? So have something that is a TKI, that has something unique about it, that has good science behind it. There's robust translational development that leads up to doing a trial in a specific population that you can say, aha, you guys have your compounds and you know them well, but I've got this one that's different for this reason, and here's my result. You can create value that way. So I think you got to be kind of thoughtful about that. One more point I'll make on targeted therapies and why they're so attractive is, back to my Novartis days, so Jörg Zimmerman was my Uber boss on the chemistry side. He was the guy who led the Gleevec development. So he ran the chemistry group, then invented Gleevec, and he was my boss. And he tells the story of, guys, when we were doing this project, he was trying to pump up the group. Right? He's like, all the marketing guys told us, NFW, we should go forward with this. Right? They said, look how many patients you got there. This is before prices were out of whack, right? And look how many patients you got, and you can't justify the investment. The ROI sucks. But what they didn't account for in their model was you got 10-year survivors on Gleevec now. And the NPV of patient over 10 years, most oncology therapy, think about chemo, how many cycles can you give to the patient? How long can a patient be exposed to some of these things, right? Even, Avastin, how many cycles can you get into a patient? You can get patients on Avastin for 10 years, consistently cycle every week for the rest of their lives. The NPV is massive, right? And then the reason for that is that a lot of targeted therapies are better tolerated. You take them for long periods of time. If you have better outcomes in patients, they're surviving longer. So it makes a huge difference. So I think, that's some of the motivating factors. Let's go to the next one. Kevin touched on some of this data. I'm glad we have the same data, by the way. It correlates.
I saw you taking those.
I had an arrow on mine, I think.
You were nice. But I guess the point I want to make here, and I agree with the points you made, but some thoughts behind why is the success rate in phase 3 oncology lower? Well, our industry is plagued by the single-arm phase 2. I mean, how many single-arm phase 2 trials do you guys see that you say, how do you value this? How do you predict the success in this? You can't, right? So I think a lot of it is, you could do more robust phase 2 development. Part of that's our fault for not having the resources as, the private venture community to really do proper trials in a lot of cases, although we're trying to change that. But I think that's one of the big drivers here. And we like to do the analysis, if you get a bunch of venture guys sitting around long enough with no companies to ask questions, we start asking each other questions. It's kind of interesting, but it happens. And what happens is we start asking ourselves the questions, well, gee, guys, what would our success rate be in terms of pickers? And we try to do this, and you always buy when we do this analysis, but when we go back and look at, really robust, validated, preclinical data and phase 2 data that we look at as a group and say, what, this looks credible, let's go to the next slide. This will be a better proxy. You get a much higher success rate. So if you just look at all kinase inhibitors in development, and you look at phase transition probability by phase, right? So phase 1, just looking at ADME-PK, our ability to, make a drug that gets distributed appropriately to site of action, right? So that's here. That's about the same. There's not differentiation there. But when you look at phase 2, 3, and phase 3 transition success, the kinase inhibitors, which by definition are, almost all targeted. We could argue about how targeted Nexavar is, or how many kinases. Okay, we don't have to go into that. But there's better validated biology, and there's usually more robust development behind these programs, and the success rate is disproportionately higher. And when we do our kind of internal, how would we pick analysis, we get something more similar to this. So I think probability of success, I think if you look at the aggregate number, I don't think that's the right way to look at it, certainly from an investor perspective, because a lot of those things we would never touch with our risk capital. It's too much risk. So I think that when you have things that are well-validated mechanisms, well-validated biology, that have done robust clinical development, you can have disproportionate success rates. And it's possible to put capital to work. I mean, we hope to be in business for a long period of time. You touched on, is the venture model broken? We'd like to think that there is good opportunity with the shrinking amount of capital in the ecosystem. We think the groups that are left are going to have even better opportunities. We can drive more aggressive pricing. So I just want to share that thought. So let's keep going. This is a bit of an eye chart, but I just wanted to, highlight the point that rewards are there for R&D products in oncology that are successful, right? I mean, these guys pay up if you give them something that clearly, shows value. I mean, they'll try to structure it on you, they'll give most of it later, but there is returns to be made, and let's just touch on one of the most recent ones is Avila. I mean, it's a company that had the next in line BTK inhibitor behind pharmaceutics. People think of this as a platform company. Actually, it's not, in my view. This was more of a they have an alpha beta unsaturated NAM and it does a 1,4 addition. The same thing as pharmaceutics molecule. I'm a chemist, I look at the structure, it's the same structure. But they had great data. There's no question they had great data, and it was a nice return for the investors. So this was an example of a company where we were talking to them in parallel to their strategic process as a private investor. We were interested to support the company to take it further in development, and they did their own internal math. They said, you know what, the deal we got is better than the deal you're going to offer us, so we're going to take it out. And they were doing that back of the envelope, right? Risk associated with next step, how much capital you guys are going to give, and the dilution that we're asking for. And their math said it was better to take that deal. So I guess what I'll leave you with is a couple thoughts on, how are we as an investment group trying to be flexible and adapt to this environment, right? So you hear about, the venture model broken, there's all these challenges, and maybe I'll give you 2 case studies of things that we're working on now, active investment. So we're in the process of closing an investment in an early stage oncology company, which is not something we do a lot of, but it's a company that has a couple of assets that are in known classes that we feel are differentiated, and we feel like we're going to be able to show, a really a quick proof of concept that's differentiated that will get, interest of potential partners. And we're starting this company now, and we'll hope to announce that in the next week or 2. Another one is a company that, maybe I'll step back. Another theme for us that's really important is to be able to leverage non-dilutive capital sources and be creative in structuring our companies in order to maximize return. And I don't know how many of you have heard of this secret initiative down in Texas, but the state of Texas has put together a couple $2 billion pool of capital. It's this very large pool of capital. They're putting, so it's $2 billion over 10 years. They're putting $200 million out the door every year to support specifically oncology, biotechnology development in Texas. So kind of the terms of this are, you as a private investor start a company that has a presence in Texas. They'll leverage 2 to 1 dollar, so every dollar we put at risk, they'll leverage 2. They'll structure it any way we want, debt, equity, royalty on the product, although they'll only do 1 royalty, they won't stack it. But okay, can't ask for everything. And this is happening now. So we actually were just down there last week meeting with some of these folks, and they've got a couple, companies off the ground, but a lot of the money has gone into more grants and things that don't translate well into economic development. We really need, a company managed by professional managers, and that's what the mandate has evolved to. And we're looking at this model in conjunction with a corporate structure model where, kind of like Pharma, Steve Krieg is a friend, he's CEO of Pharma, and what Steve has moved to is, and this is what we're thinking about here, and Armin, we've done this too, is to create a corporate structure where you can have the individual assets monetizable as individual assets. So, a lot of times you can, we as private investors can move an asset to the next stage of development, and it's hard for us to sell the whole company for cash on the barrelhead. That's just hard to do. It's hard for you guys to do it. It's hard for us to convince you to do it, and you have a lot of leverage in negotiations. So, what we have to do to adapt is to say, well, why don't we create a corporate vehicle that allows us to monetize that partnership? So this is something we did at Itero, I was on the board there, where we had, a partnership with one of these assets at an early stage, late preclinical in this case, where we turned it into, an LLC, and we essentially, you sell the asset into that, and, you pay tax on that up front, but then everything that comes in, all the economics that come in are capital gains tax. That's pretty good. And it allows us to maximize the value of the partnership and return that value dollars to the investors, as opposed to just rolling it into more R&D spend or something else, in which case you'll never make a return. So, it kind of allows us to capture some economics, and it makes some of these deals more attractive to us. It makes us more motivated to say, I'll do a deal like that because I can get, maybe a 1x my capital. I'll get my bait back up front, and then on the come I can make a nice return over time. Okay, IRR, you can argue about that, but it's something that we're trying to be flexible with, evolving how we're structuring investments, and especially when we do it in conjunction with non-dilutive capital. That combination really makes it possible for us to say, you know what, we don't think the venture model is broken. We think we can adapt, and we can leverage these resources. So maybe I think this is my last slide. Maybe I'll stop there. I think, give you guys a chance to ask some questions.
So it's already late, so I want to tee up a couple of questions and then give you the opportunity to interact with the panel. First question is, in your view, and maybe more for you, Kevin, and maybe actually Mark, what are the key tumor types where you see the highest unmet needs today? What are these tumor types that you think are going to be areas of focus moving forward in the next 4 to 5 years?
Yeah, do you want to take a step?
I'm going to give you an answer that's going to sound like a cop-out, and that's exactly the way we don't think about our approach to R&D. I think that if you think on a tumor basis, you're going to miss kind of the way we think about it, which is more on a molecular basis. And I think that in oncology, you have more of a trend where you're talking about PI-positive non-small cell lung cancer. If you're looking at diseases being categorized by their molecular profile versus, the tissue or the tumor type.
Sure.
Setting is definitely important because it brings in a competitive landscape. But I think we're not curing in a whole lot of cancers, so almost all of them are fair game. So I can sit here and point out all of them. The ones that have a significant unmet need, they're really hard to crack. We can take pancreatic, we can talk about AML, and there are reasons why drugs fail there, and so you've got to be really brave to do that. But if you put all your eggs in the basket there and think only about focusing on those diseases, you may not have any wins. And so, because our strategy is so focused on fundamental sciences, we don't think in those terms, and I think we can make improvements across most of the areas, because there are people who relapse, and the cure rates, when you do get them, it's not usually 100% of all the patients.
Yeah, I agree. I think we shared the view that kind of what I alluded to a little bit before was the better you can select patients and find a targeted niche, that's where we think we can be most effective. And maybe I'll just put another slant on it. You have to think about the development path to approval as well. And so think about, if you want to get a new prostate cancer drug approved, there's a lot of things on the landscape. It's actually logistically very difficult to run a hormone refractory prostate cancer trial. Okay, maybe you can get to really beat up super refractory metastatic patients that you don't have a chance to help anyway, right? So there has to be a development path that you can legitimately go forward with on a, with a reasonable number of patients that's fundable, that's logistically possible. And I think a lot of times that's a constraint for us. We see opportunities that, I got this great opportunity in breast, and here's 5 reasons why it works. Well, it's not so easy to do a breast trial first line, and getting there is very difficult. So I think, there's additional constraint of just the regulatory path it's going to take to get from A to B. There has to be a viable one.
Okay, great. My other question is really around overall strategy, looking at therapeutics and the company and the diagnostic, and that's the stance that Roche Genentech is taking right now. Is it the winning value proposition for the industry, specific again to oncology? Is it going to be the standard? Whether it is through partnering or acquisition or building internal capabilities on the diagnostic side, what is your thinking on this? Maybe from a big pharma standpoint.
Is it that?
Let's hear
Big pharma now.
Yeah. Almost.
Downgrade. Yeah, depends on what it's talking about this back. I think that the days of sort of throw it up against the wall and hope to move the median 14 days over, and that's those days are coming to an end. So one way forward is trying to enrich the population, as others have said, and if you can find the 20 patients, the Asian female never smokers for Tarceva that really accrue the benefit. Those are clinical characteristics, but certainly I think the molecular approach is good, but I don't think that's going to be the only way forward. I think there's plenty of other drugs, Revlimid, very active drug in first line, nearly 100% response rates. I could argue, when we sit in rooms with the best myeloma docs in the world, they say, well, why would I want to biomarker for Revlimid? Everyone works in history, and there's still value proposition in these sort of multi-targeted
Any questions?
My name is Josh Shao. I used to work at Amgen, worked quite a few years on biologics. And you alluded to the success rate on the TKI versus others. I'm just wondering whether you or others on the panel has any data on the success rate on the large molecules or the small molecules. I have some data from my days at Amgen, but curious.
I know Armin's an expert. I see him smiling. He'll keep me honest, but you know, the data I've seen, it's not that different than the TKI data I showed you. I mean, it's disproportionately better in terms of success for phase transition.
Thanks.
Did you agree with that?
Yeah, it's mainly phase one. Right, you don't have phase one failure, you have 70% translation there versus 40%
I was just curious whether what's the current view about alternative scaffolds? You know, you talk about targeted therapeutics. I mean, obviously a lot of monoclonal still, but how about alternative scaffolds? And anyone have some comments on that?
I have a perspective on that. Having used to be, technology was kind of a place I'd come from. So I think technology is great if you're solving a unique issue, right? So if you have a way of hitting an intractable target, sure, that's useful. But a lot of those platforms are just ways of getting around modalities that we're very comfortable with. We know how to manufacture. We know the immunogenicity potential for all those. And so you have to ask what's the problem you're solving by just changing the modality. And so I think that you can follow the cycle over the last 10 years. I mean, there's been a lot of attraction. Roche had invested in RNAi and exited it. They all sound good, but you have to, I mean, there's the feasibility component of it, and it takes a while to establish. I mean, Genentech's been making large molecules for a long time, and it took a long time to figure that part out, and now a lot of the world has developed that capability. And we're doing antibody drug conjugates as another way, as another technology right now, but the alternative scaffolds have to provide some property that we can't do with our existing technologies that are so well thought out, because you don't want that additive technology risk. There's technology risk, there's potential clinical risk, and regulatory. The regulators may not even know how to deal with it in some contexts.
Maybe I'll just say one comment on that. And I think one of the most exciting areas that I see getting pitched to, and I see a lot of these are in the immunotherapeutic space, not necessarily like CTLA-4, antibody or PD-1 antibody, but either an autologous or a direct kind of immune approach. And I think a lot of these things are really interesting. I think there's a lot of promise there. It's hard to fund for the increased risk profile, but I'm optimistic for seeing great success in that area.
Right. I mean, obviously Genentech being the being the dominant player in antibody therapeutics, obviously you would be you would have less incentive to move into. But speaking of decreased possibilities of new chemical, new molecule entities, I was just curious whether that's a shared view in the space. In terms of other specialty pharmas. But thank you for the
Wondering if anybody had any thoughts on if and when we're going to see sort of a revolution in terms of clinical trial design, sort of bolstering the well-known defects in the FDA process. I think Mark alluded to with these single-arm phase 2s from the sort of coupled concepts of electronic record keeping and observational trials. So is there a revolution sort of just around the corner, or are we going to get much more rapidly to all of these groups that we need to push trials for? What will the impact be on the landscape for investing in these things?
Not to bring up a sore subject, but the recent debacle of PFS is a surrogate approval endpoint in oncology. You guys live with, and with the best and breast data.
Yeah.
That I can tell you that has rippled through FDA something fierce, and a lot of our portfolio companies are having a lot of challenges getting anything through. So I give you an example. We have an orphan disease opportunity that we're dealing with now that they can't get FDA to agree on a surrogate endpoint. It's an orphan disease. This isn't diabetes. orphan disease product, all the KOLs, rank and file will say, this surrogate marker correlates with clinical outcome to the best of our estimation. We believe it. Here's all this longitudinal data over 20 years. To get a surrogate endpoint approved through FDA today, you have to go to a super committee that's outside of each division that has a separate vote. Guess how many have been approved today since this has been enacted since the blow up? There's been 9 that have gone in front of it. How many have been accepted?
I think you're asking a loaded question.
So not to be too negative on FDA, I'm optimistic that there can be change, but I think it gets worse before it gets better.
Maybe a corollary to John's question is more of the growth of adaptive trial designs like the iSpy going on at UCSF, the ability to get, because we're thinking about this very sequential, what's the attrition rates from our historical staged clinical development path. Maybe there's a new strategy which allows us to have things drop out or advance in this adaptive manner as we gain more information about them and continue to enrich patients. And so that's kind of where I see sort of some more excitement in terms of clinical trials progress.
Probably have a couple questions. I'll just ask one right now. So a couple times, pricing of oncology drugs was alluded to, and it's probably has to change at some point. So in the context of valuation, how do you view the timing of that inevitability happening, and how do you see that affecting how we as venture capitalists view exits, as you as acquirers view acquisition and risk associated with that? Question for all you guys, because every one of you is impacted by this.
I'll take the first stab, and others maybe jump in. I mean, you're looking into the crystal ball.
Absolutely.
I mean, all the DCS I've ever ran, I agree that PTS is always it's always most sensitive to the PTS, but price is also very sensitive to price. So I think we at least in from my company's point of view, we certainly follow very, very closely what's going on in the major markets, and I think can you build into your models price increases like that have occurred over the last 10 or 15 years? We take a much more conservative view than that. So, and I think it's got to be tied to the target product profile too. I think especially when you look at it from a global perspective. Even if the regulators approve of Aston with the 2 or 3 month PFS advantage, I don't know how much longer the market will bear that at the current price.
Right. So you would argue one would pay for value if value is there.
I think you kind of have to believe that.
Oh,
I think we have to aim high and assume the trend is low. Right? That's the reimbursement. I mean, that trend is probably real, and it's going to be persistent. And it's not going to go up all of a sudden. So your efficacy bar has to be that much higher. And then you assume that if efficacy, the question is how much, and then how much are we willing to pay for that trade-off, and no one knows. It is crystal ball, because especially early stage, you're looking 10 years out. There's a lot of dynamic forces, and the global component really plays a big factor here. That I don't know if, I don't know how you predict it. We try our best, is the best you can do. I don't think anyone's got a great algorithm for that. Otherwise, we would just stop the business. But it's a tough business right now.
Right. I mean, I'll let the rest of you answer. So I think it was it Biogen and Avanex in the UK that basically ended up going to a pay-for-performance model. So if the drug worked, then they got reimbursed for it. Do you see, so personally, I really like that model, because it means that I believe my product enough that it's going to work, so I'm willing to say, pay me if it does. And I think you can probably get a higher premium in that case. How do you guys, from like that company perspective, I mean, it's not the normal way of thinking because there's a lot of risk associated with it. On the other hand, to your point, you have to believe in it to be willing to do that. So just philosophically, I guess, how do you guys view that kind of thing?
Comment on that first and others. I mean, I think it's an incredibly sexy philosophy. I talk to a lot of payers in the U.S. and this has happened in cancer too. Velcade has the same deal in the UK, and in the U.S., a lot of payers, for the same reasons you state, love it. I mean, if TV doesn't work, you take it back to Best Buy or Amazon now. So why not the same for drugs? But I have spent a lot of time talking to folks in the UK about this, and in the case of Velcade, at least, I don't know the Avanex case very well, but what ended up happening, if you talk to the hematologists and the payers, that they'll never do another deal like that again. You're putting a bureaucrat in between a hematologist and a patient, and now a bureaucrat's trying to understand M protein. What does that mean? Do they really progress? And you talk to the hematologist, just add a little bit of dex, and I can get anyone into a PR. So you create a system that can be gamed. It will be gamed, and I think that the government in the UK greatly underestimated the administrative burden there. So I think you're seeing more of these types of deals where first 2 months are free, and if the patient's still on the drug, that's a more simple, from an administrative perspective, way to select out the bad
So
actors
you
and not
let
pay
the
for them.
physician make the choice, and it's sort of if there's an effect and the physician thinks there is, then it's valid.
Yeah, I think that's more and more. I mean, there's certainly, I know South Korea's done a deal like that, and the Italians too. So I think that's going to be, the future. More so. I mean, it has to be simple from an administrative perspective.
It's also incredibly biased, I think, against small and mid-sized companies that choose to commercialize themselves, because if you take the cost, usually if you're a smaller company, you make the choice earlier, I'm going to ramp up, pay a sales force, manufacture commercial quantities of something. If the regulators say this sucks, doesn't work, okay, you're done. But if you choose to forego partnering with pharma, and you think, we can build a small organization, we can move forward, the VCs fund that company because they think that's a more economical way to do it, you get all the way to the market, and then you start getting, for whatever reason, the product returned to you, well, then you're first, there's a huge supply risk, because if you're a company that's not well capitalized, even at that point, a lot of companies that are launching are still not very well capitalized. They either have to go deal with pharma at incredibly terrible terms at that point, or go sell the drug to the government like it's an anthrax vaccine, or to the public, get interest, or go under. So I think that it's kind of it might not be that it's the sort of hidden cost of that would hurt the biotech industry in general.
Yeah, and I guess, from our perspective, some of that argument is built in a little bit to our selection criteria. So we're looking for things that select patients to have select therapies to go to patients where they're going to have disproportionate value. So we think the disproportionate value piece for us is almost a prereq to do an investment in an asset. So I think a little bit it solves that. I mean, the pay for performance piece, I did some work on this in my former life, and I agree with the logistics challenges. That's a big piece. But in oncology, how many cycles is a patient going to get if they're not benefiting? They're going to move on to something else. So in some ways, you self-select out that group a little bit, kind of what you were saying, right? So that's that piece. I guess the only other thought about, benefit and defining benefit, I'll just share it. And something I think about a lot is, we make fun of Avastin for the median benefit, right? But there is a tail of patients that have a substantial benefit. So I think that, we like to throw around medians because it's easy. But when you actually do the waterfall plot and you look at individual patient responses, if you're that 1 or 2 or 5% of people that have, the disproportionate response, you're going to take the chance to get the drug, right? And, Provenge, I think it's the same thing, right? God forbid I had prostate cancer, but there's a tail out there. And if you look at their data, there's a couple patients that are probably getting a couple more years of really high quality life because they're getting that therapy. Okay, doesn't help a lot of people. A lot of people get zero benefit, but there's a tail there, right? So I think that's where you get into a more interesting question of how do you price it, how do you pay, and for things like that. But I think that we pick on the median a little bit. I think sometimes that's a little bit unfair.
I have a question about, in terms of I think that both of you showed very nicely about the success rate of transitions from phases. And Kevin talked about Genentech is very interested in having deals with early, even in the discovery stage. I'm just curious, from a VC point of view, you or others you noticed, what stage of the compound that you guys are looking for to fund? Because I got mixed feedbacks from people. People say, well, yours is too early, just an idea. Come back with in vivo data. But the other people say, well, we're interested to come early. If you have IP, even just idea, show us. We'll take a look and we'll decide. I'm just curious how you guys think.
So groups are bifurcated, and I think the best advice I can give you is look at the recent deals a group has done to get a sense for if they do early stage or not. Some groups won't touch it at all. Some groups like a lot. A couple groups do early stage, SB Life Sciences, 5AM, Third Rock guys. Those are the types of groups that like to do new company foundation early stage stuff. Harman might do one too if you talk nice to them. You know, we're kind of in the middle. I think we do some early stage companies, but I'd say our bias is later. And I'd say if I had to do a center point of all life sciences VCs, I'd say the center point is later clinical stage after proof of concept, but that's my 2 cents. I don't know if you would.
I agree.
Now, if we had more non-dilutive capital.
Or if the public markets get better and you guys have to start investing in early stuff again.
There you go. Yeah, we're not getting opportunity.
All right, so we're getting close to 9 p.m. So I'm gonna take one last question. There is one last question. All right. Any final thoughts you'd like to share with the audience?
I think it's a great time, just putting on your individual investor hat. It's a point I didn't get to a slide there, but there's a real drop off in diagnostics. I think it's less so in therapeutics for some weird reasons, but underneath $500 million market cap, you go from companies having about 15 analysts who overcover everything they do to 0 analysts. And that was part of what's driving, I think, it's still a half-baked idea, but I think the correlation's sort of there. So there really are a lot of companies that have, I think, good assets, and if you see the strategic guys all over them early, but no analysts covering it, very little, it's actually probably a good place to kick the tires. And that there's that at least one silver lining in the lack of capital as an individual investor. That's a place to look for some good ideas.
All right. Well, thanks again for your time. Thanks for joining, and have a good rest of the evening. Thanks.
Thanks, Mark.
Good job. Yeah. We obviously confirmed him along with you guys. Absolutely. Because